California Dreaming is brought to you by BLUBRRY. You know, there is a little bit more to making a podcast than just talking into a mic and hitting publish. You need more than that. And I'm talking about a reliable hosting service so your time can be spent working on your show. You also want accurate download numbers, you want to see the audience that you're reaching, and you're going to want a webpage that is simple and easy to work with. That's why I choose BLUBRRY. With its simple media hosting and fully integrated WordPress website, it can't get any easier. So if you host a show or if you're thinking about starting one, visit www.orbitaljigsaw.com/dream to give BLUBRRY a try for a month for free. BLUBRRY's support team will be right there every step of the way to help you migrate over so you won't lose any of your subscribers in the process. And if you're brand new to this, they can get your new show up and running. And with a month for free to try it out using promo code DREAM, what have you got to lose? There are a number of ways that you can support California Dreaming. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can spread the word about the show. You can recommend us in podcast and true crime fan groups. And you can leave the show a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you listen to us on. And if you would like to go a little above and beyond, you can support the show on our Patreon. You can gain access to at least one exclusive episode per month, and there are currently more than 45 episodes that you can binge. So it's a pretty good deal starting at just $1. And in addition, there are about 8 premium episodes available for supporters at the $5 and above tiers. I hope that you all are enjoying the episodes that have gone up on Patreon in the last week. A special series entitled The Only Way Out, and the only way to find out what the story is about is to be a patron at any level, starting at $1. So that isn't too shabby for hours and hours of content, and this series is far from over. This week, I'd like to thank Jessica S., Muffy, Kyle R., Maureen S., Catherine D., Cherish B., Elaine F., Stephen H., and Kim W. for becoming the newest members of Patreon. And if you are unable to sign up for a monthly subscription, you can help support the show with a one-time donation through our PayPal using my email at californiapod@gmail.com. Every little bit helps and every little bit is appreciated in keeping us going. So thank you so much. And as I mentioned, there is a special series that is available on Patreon. We have 2 parts up already, and it's for all subscribers at all levels. It's a pretty in-depth, and it's going to be a multi-part series, and I'm working on dropping each part one by one across the month of August, possibly into September. It's hard to tell how many episodes it's going to be, but I will tell you this. I'm not going to discuss this case publicly outside of Patreon. Those of you who are supporters already know this, and I really appreciate all of the messages that you've been sending me through there. It's a project that many of us are interested in, but for various reasons, I just decided to put it onto Patreon. It just seemed like something that was better suited for there instead of going on the regular California Dreaming feed. There are a lot of really interesting stories on Patreon, and it's hard to pick and choose which ones to put on there as premium content or what to put on the free feed, because there are stories that I would like to share with all of you, though I do have to set aside some stuff for those who support the show financially. So the story isn't going on Patreon because of a lack of desire to want to share this content with all of you. It's just best that I don't. And that being said, if you're a patron, you have been getting notifications from me in your emails. When the next part of the series is going to be available, I'll let you know. I'm not quite sure yet. The first 2 were very intense. It's a total of 4 hours of content, as you know. So I'm kind of breaking away from that for a little bit to get back to this. Again, I thank you for keeping the discussion between us on Patreon, and just make sure you keep your eyes on your email because the next part 3 will be up soon. And lastly, my apologies for taking a while to get this episode out to you. As a filler, I made one of the past Patreon bonuses from January of 2019 available for free for 72 hours. If you need me to extend it, message me and let me know. It's the story of death row inmate and double murderer Daniel Wozniak. So get over to Patreon while you can have a listen, and I'll post the link in the show notes this week. All right, let's get into this week's 156th episode of California Dreaming, The Disappearance of Elijah Running Bear Diaz. Elijah Running Bear Diaz was born August 19, 1995, and was a member of the Barona Tribe of Native Americans of Southern California. He was almost exclusively called Bear. As a matter of fact, I've heard that some of his friends weren't even aware that his name was Elijah. So for this episode, we will call him Bear. If you are from the San Diego area or you have been to the area, then you may be aware that there are numerous Native American reservations, and many of those reservations have casino resorts. One of them is the Barona Resort and Casino, which is located in Lakeside, California. I have been there many times. It was one of my mom's favorite places to go and play Pai Gow poker. We would drop her off at the casino because I had Evelyn with me, and she and I would go off and do other things around the San Diego area until my mom was done, and then we'd pick her up and go home. It was about an hour and a half drive from where we lived. Evelyn and I would go shopping, we'd go eat, we'd go to the movies, or we'd go to Old Town. San Diego was and is one of our favorite places to visit for like a day trip. According to the Barona website, the Barona tribe lived peacefully in what is today San Diego County. And as you know, the lives of many Native American tribes were disrupted in this area in the late 1700s, which would mark the beginning of more than 2 centuries of hardships for Native Americans, starting with the arrival of the Spanish military. They began establishing their military forts and their missions there in 1769 on Barona territory. In 1875, the federal government established the Captain Grand Reservation for Native Americans who were still living in the area. Then, about 40 years later, the reservation was bought by the city in order to build a reservoir, at which time all Native Americans were removed from their land. At that point, without any land to call home, the Barona tribal members took some of the federal money from the sale of the Captain Grand Reservation and purchased the Barona Ranch, today called the Barona Indian Reservation in Lakeside, located about 30 miles northeast of the city of San Diego. For decades, tribe members lived without electricity or other modern services, so they did what they could to earn a living by way of ranching and farming. This lasted all the way until the early 90s. The tribe continued to struggle financially. They were in a very rural area of San Diego. However, in 1994, in conjunction with a Detroit-based company called Venture Catalyst, which is a nonprofit organization that builds inclusive ecosystems through development, management, and strategic support for large-scale ecosystem partnerships, entrepreneurships, events, funding, and growth programs, the Barona Valley Ranch Resort and Casino opened. And with the casino, it turned the economy of the tribe completely around, as now they have a 0% unemployment rate, each tribe member is self-sufficient, and the profits from the casino are distributed to all the members of the tribe as a monthly stipend, which I believe is going to play into what ultimately happened to Bear. When Bear was 4, his parents divorced, and his mom, Leilani, ended up moving back to the Barona Reservation. It was only 2 years later when Mom began becoming concerned about Bear's health. He was beginning to not seem like himself. As one of the most telling things, the normal levels of energy that he would have as an average 6-year-old began to dissipate. She noticed that he wasn't engaging with his friends as much or for the normal amount of times that he used to. He was becoming fatigued rather quickly. And over time, as Leilani kept a watchful eye on what was going on with Bear, she began to see that he wasn't improving, but rather he was getting worse. Other symptoms began setting in. He started running an unusually high fever, and it wouldn't just be for a few days. It would last for an extended period of time, at least a week, sometimes more. Eventually, Bear began having difficulties keeping food down, and the boy is already thin as a rail if you've seen pictures of him. By the time he was 20, he was only 5'9" or 1.75 meters tall, and he weighed about 110 pounds or 50 kilograms soaking wet. So his mom decided to take him in to see his doctor to try and figure out what was going on with her son. And it seems as though Leilani made it just in time. As the doctors were surprised, Bear was even walking upright into the hospital based on what they would find once they started running tests on him. Bear would end up being diagnosed as having type 1 diabetes. He was only 6. Obviously, his mom had no idea, so he was most likely consuming copious amounts of foods and drinks that would have sent his blood sugar level soaring. And if you're the parent of a child with juvenile diabetes, my hat's off to you, because it is not easy getting a kid to understand why they can't eat this or drink that, or why you have to prick their finger and give them insulin shots. As I mentioned in the past, I used to provide childcare for a pretty large family from 2013 to 2016. And in that time, the oldest of the children that I took care of, he was first diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which almost took his life because he was misdiagnosed in the beginning as having conjunctivitis, which now that I think about is kind of weird because they only saw that one of his eyes was shut and kind of droopy, but what he had was far worse than a case of pink eye. I had actually never heard of myasthenia gravis, and perhaps many of you haven't either, but according to the Mayo Clinic website, it's characterized by a weakness and rapid fatigue of any of the muscles under a person's voluntary control. It's caused by a breakdown in normal communication between nerves and muscles. Muscle weakness caused by MG worsens as the affected muscles are being used, and because the symptoms are getting better when the patient gets rest, the weaknesses in the muscles can come and go. And I remember his symptoms before he was diagnosed being intermittent like that. There were days like he was feeling good, and there were other days when he was really, really exhausted and fatigued. But it says that in more than half the people who develop MG, the first signs of it involve eye problems, including the drooping of one or both eyes. But anyway, like I said, he was misdiagnosed. The doctor thought he had pink eye, which thinking back upon it is kind of surprising, but anyway. Eventually, he ended up in the emergency room and then transported to Children's Hospital in Orange County because his respiratory system was shutting down as the MG was continuing to go untreated. He was on breathing machines for a while, but he pulled through. But not only was he diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, he was also diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So this added another layer of complications in terms of the care that I needed to provide for these kids. He wasn't the only one that I was taking care of. He had a sister 10 months younger than him, and 2 of his cousins as well who were also younger than him. So by the summer of 2015, it turned into 3 of his cousins, so I had 5 kids under the age of 5. I had my hands full. So he had to undergo IVIG treatments once a month, and they opted, of course, to have the nurse come into the home and do it there, which caused me to basically hope for the best with all the other kids while I had to help restrain him while they did his IVIG, which is intravenous immunoglobulin. It's complicated. I'm not a doctor or a nurse, so I don't want to get into it. Honestly, I'm sorry. Intravenous meaning a needle had to be put into his arm and kept in his arm for hours while they did something with his blood cells and whatnot and whatever. I mean, it was a nightmare. And you probably know this if you've ever had to give a 3 or 4-year-old an IV for anything. And then his diabetes on top of that, having to force him to prick his finger 2 or 3 times a day, which I took classes for specifically to understand how to take care of a child with diabetes. It was a lot. And while quitting the job really wasn't because of his health issues, it kind of factored into it. It was more having to do with the levels of stress of having so many little children in a confined space for a really long time. While I know I'd be able to handle it if I had to, unless you've taken care of a toddler with exceptional health issues, it's really, really hard. And my hat's off to all of you who provide special care for special needs children. You all are absolute heroes. I swear, it's an amazing job that you guys do taking care of these children with these exceptional health problems. And Bear was one of them. He went into the hospital, and while the normal sugar levels range, I believe, between 90 and perhaps about 130 or so, Bear came in to see his doctor with a blood sugar level of 800. Either way it goes, either too high or too low, it becomes life-threatening. and 600 is considered the threshold for dangerously high levels of sugar, and his was 800. So they were surprised he was even standing up. Of course, being diagnosed with diabetes is life-changing, but it is manageable. But give that to a 6-year-old child, it's going to be a difficult thing to deal with, and it would be a battle for Bear for the rest of his life. It's going to be a thing that he is going to have to deal with, and how he felt was going to depend on how well it was going to be managed and how well his mom and him were going to be able to manage his blood sugar. He's going to have to remember to test it. He's going to have to recognize when he isn't feeling well or if his levels are fluctuating too much. It's not easy for a child, and it would take its toll on Bear throughout his childhood, and he would struggle with this over the course of almost the next 15 years. According to Leilani, Bear would also begin to deal with bouts of depression related to having to cope with frequent hospital stays. He was in and out of the hospital numerous times out of the year, and then there was one period of time when he was 17 that he was hospitalized for 5 months. Now, we all probably know people who have diabetes. While there is no cure for it, and it's going to be a lifelong health issue for the most part, the people who I have known who are diabetic have been able to manage it relatively well through diet and insulin and moderate exercise. I mean, having diabetes isn't the end of the world, but Bear's case, to me, seemed particularly difficult. I don't know if he had other extenuating health problems or if he just had difficulty managing the diabetes or sticking to his medications or remembering his insulin or watching his diet. It's my understanding that the diabetes he suffered from may have been particularly complicated, but I'm not a medical professional. I can't say for sure why or if there's anything he could have done differently to improve his overall health, but it continued to be a struggle day in and day out, and it was taking its toll on him emotionally, mentally, and physically. The upside of all of this for Bear is the fact that he did have the benefit of being a member of the Barona tribe. So when it came to money and his finances, he was not going to have to worry about that on top of his health struggles. And what that was going to do for Bear is it was going to enable him to afford a certain level of independence, and he wasn't going to have to worry about complicating his mental and physical health issues by having to worry about holding down a job and the stress over that. So there was a little bit of a silver lining for him in this, that he didn't have to worry about how he was going to take care of himself for the long term once he became an adult and ventured off onto his own. One of the ways that Bear enjoyed putting his troubles out of his mind was to live his life on his own terms. He had a lot of close friends, and he very much enjoyed spending time with them, hanging out, doing whatever late teen and early 20s guys like to do. And from the interviews that I've seen with some of his friends, they had an understanding of what Bear was struggling with. They knew it was a difficult thing, and they seemed to be very caring and supportive as Bear navigated life with his diabetes. In the end, all Bear wanted was to enjoy time with his close friends and have a good time. By all accounts, Bear had a strong support system, and this included his mom. To an extent, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later, his mom's involvement. So by the time Bear turned 20, which was on August 19th, 2015, he seemed as though he reached a point where he was ready for a big change in life. I don't know if any of you have been to the area near or surrounding the Barona Reservation. The drive onto the reservation is actually really unique, and it's very scenic through Wildcat Canyon. It's a 2-lane road, and it's pretty winding. I can't remember for sure, but I think there are a couple of times I've mentioned Wildcat Canyon Road in the past. I might be wrong, but I think the episode that I did with Tyler from the Minds of Madness podcast on Peter Chadwick, I think he dumped his wife's body. Peter Chadwick, not Tyler from Minds of Madness. He did not dump his wife anywhere. She's alive and well, as far as I know. So Peter Chadwick dumped his wife's body in a trash bin along a canyon road. And because the homes are set a pretty good distance from the road, their trash bins are out there away from the house to be picked up. There had been some sort of billing dispute or something, so while Chadwick's wife, QC, was inside this bin, it was never actually picked up. And I think this happened along Wildcat Canyon, which is the road that leads into Barona Reservation. Also, you may have heard of the canyon back in 2003, especially if you're from the area, when a massively devastating wildfire ripped through the canyon. Commonly known as the Cedar Fire, it burned in total more than 273,000 acres or 1,100 square kilometers of land in San Diego County in October and November of 2003. What made the fire grow so quickly was due to the Santa Ana winds, which fanned the flames, causing it to spread at a rate of 3,600 acres per hour. And part of the affected area was that 2-lane winding canyon road leading to and from the Barona Reservation. The Cedar Fire was first called in shortly after 5:30 p.m. on October 25, 2003 in central San Diego County. Unfortunately, at the time, firefighting resources were already stretched to their limits, as 11 other wildfires were burning all over Southern California. A massive firefighting effort was deployed to the area, but the water drop helicopters were just minutes away from the fire when it was called off because it is policy to halt aerial firefighting a half hour before sunset. This would have devastating results. Within 10 hours, 62,000 acres had burned, and during the night, the fire being fanned by the Santa Anas killed 12 people who lived along Wildcat Canyon. They were given little to no warning that a fire was rapidly approaching. And if there is one road that I would not want to be on racing a fire, it would be Wildcat Canyon Road. It is so narrow and so perilous, especially at night. 39 homes on the Barona Reservation were destroyed that night, and within a few more hours, 100,000 acres had been burned. It had jumped highways and freeways, including the 15, rapidly headed west, destroying another 500 homes in the town of Julian and hundreds of homes in Scripps Ranch. By the next day, the fire had spread to Alpine, Harbison Canyon, Lake Jennings, and Crest, destroying hundreds of more homes. On the 29th, one firefighter was killed, several others were injured, and when all was said and done, the fire had claimed 14 civilian lives. The fire was not brought under control until December 5th, so it burned for a month and 10 days. In total, it destroyed 2,232 homes, 22 commercial buildings, and 566 outbuildings. The investigation revealed that the fire was caused by a hunter named Sergio Martinez, a resident of West Covina, California, who got lost. He first claimed that he fired a shot from his rifle as a signal that he was lost, and that is what caused the fire. But he later admitted that he intentionally started the fire to try to signal for help, and he clearly lost control of it. He was charged the following year with setting the fire and lying to authorities. He was eventually offered a plea. He was given 6 months in a work furlough program and required to complete 960 hours of community service, along with 5 years of probation and $9,000 in restitution. The lying to investigators charge was eventually dropped. The policy to cut aerial firefighting at sundown was heavily criticized, but in the end it was determined that even if they had allowed water drop helicopters, it would not have been able to prevent the fire from becoming as out of control as it did. There was also criticism about the lack of help from the military, which is situated nearby at Camp Pendleton, that their aerial resources could have been utilized, but the policies prohibited the military from getting involved until all other civilian resources had been deployed. Most of the people killed were trapped in their cars, many of them with their pets, as they attempted to get out of Wildcat Canyon. And this was the first I had ever heard of the Barona Reservation. So back to our story. At some point, Bear seemed to have reached a point where he wanted to make this change in his life. And this was specifically his living situation. He was getting that monthly stipend from the Barona casino profits, which amounted to about $8,000 a month, which is plenty of income to live on his own. I believe while he was a minor, his mom was saving the money for him to either go to college, or to help with this care, considering the health problems that he had. Well, Bear, it seemed as though he wanted to venture away from the reservation and be someplace where it wasn't so far off the beaten path. Like I said, it's about a 20-minute drive or so to get to the main road when you exit the freeway and make your way over to Wildcat Canyon and take that winding road headed towards the Barona Resort. There are some homes along the way as you go up the canyon, but other than that, it is several miles to get into any of the neighboring cities. In order to go to the store or do anything, you have to go into town. I mean, there is a gas station just before you get onto the casino grounds. There are restaurants and things inside the casino, and you can bring your kids in there, but that's all there is other than homes. In order to get anywhere, Bear would either have to drive himself if he was able to, or his mom would take him to the places he needed to go. And I mentioned earlier, he had to go to the doctor a lot. He had frequent visits and sometimes hospital stays. His mom was the one who was there to take care of him. And I don't know for sure, but from the sounds of it, in some of her interviews, Bear might have been getting a little tired of having to depend on his mother. I believe them to be very close. I didn't get the sense that they had any real issues between them. In the interviews that I've seen with Leilani, she seems pretty understanding of what her son was going through. Like, she understood him. But at the same time, it was difficult for her to stand by and see him have to go through so much, to see his health struggles. And she wanted to try to do everything she could to help him deal with it, to support him, to make things easier. And maybe somewhere along the way, he was just feeling like he wanted to take a little bit more control over his own life. Even if it may not have been the wisest decision, and perhaps Leilani had hoped he would just stay put with her so she could be close by to help him with his health problems, to drive him to his appointments, things like that. He really wanted to go out on his own, and he wanted to live closer to the city. And it's totally understandable. Because of his monthly stipend that his mom had been saving for him since childhood, he was able to afford his own place in the city of El Cajon, California. Not only that, he was able to buy it paid in full. So when you have a 20-year-old with his own place and nothing but time on his hands and money to spend, his place is going to become the new hangout spot for his friends. And that's exactly what it turned into. That's what he turned it into. He got some big TVs with, of course, video game consoles, as well as a nice car. But, despite having all of this freedom and an inviting place for all of his friends to come and hang out, he still had his health problems to deal with. But he did what he could in terms of his social life in order to stay busy, just to keep his mind and his body going. He began frequenting a local hookah lounge, and from there, he met and befriended even more people. And Bear, as a person, was a genuinely nice guy. He knew that he had his limitations physically. Like, he wasn't always going to be able to go places if he wasn't feeling well or if his body was hurting. So to offset that, he seemed to try to be more personable and likable to draw people in. And if he wasn't feeling great, then his friends would be able to come over and hang out with him at his house on those days when he just couldn't go out with them. And Bear was said to have been generous to a fault. And if you were a friend of Bear's and you needed a place to lay down at night, you were welcome to just crash at his house. From the sounds of it, his place was always available for anyone, anytime, if they wanted to just come and kick it. It was the kickback spot. Bear was indeed enjoying this period of time in his life, his home, his rules, his way. For someone physically inhibited in so many ways, it was very liberating. But we know that when it comes to diabetes, it can wreak havoc on your life if you aren't managing your sugar levels closely, if you aren't consistent with your medications or your diet or your exercise or your doctor's appointments. Was Bear's new independence causing him to neglect his health? I can't say for sure. He had health issues prior to living on his own. They seemed to set in periodically, but just this time, he wasn't living under the care and watchful eye of his mom. And at some point, after a time period of living it up with his friends in his new place, his health took a nosedive. to a point where he didn't even have it in him to do the things that he had been doing, like hanging out with his friends or having company over. All of it tapered off because he just wasn't feeling well. Bear began suffering from neuropathy. He was having some serious pain in his feet and his hands due to nerve damage related to the diabetes. When this happened, he began having difficulty standing up and walking. He couldn't drive, and now he needed his mom to come over for a better part of each day to help him with his daily routine stuff, just taking care of him, doctor's appointments, day-to-day stuff at the house, cooking, cleaning, that sort of stuff, because he was in so much pain and discomfort. And according to Leilani, this would cause Bear to slip back into the way that he was feeling about himself and life just prior to moving out. Basically, he was sick and tired of being sick and tired. He couldn't hang out with his friends like he wanted to, and it was all taking a toll on him. And not that he had much weight to begin with, he started losing even more weight. He was so skinny already. There are pictures of him online, and he just looks like a skeleton. There is one picture of him in a wheelchair, and his legs and arms are so thin, and his feet are wrapped in bandages, at least one of them. And if he wasn't in the wheelchair, then he needed crutches to walk. If he didn't get his health problems in check, if for some reason, if his health continued to deteriorate, he was running the risk of possibly losing one or both of his feet. And to compound everything else, he was developing cataracts, so his vision was failing him too. I know Bear longed for a certain amount of independence. He wanted to be on his own. He didn't want to feel like he had to depend on his mom. He had the means to do it, but his mom may or may not have wanted to intervene and try to tell him, you have these serious health problems. I think you need to stay home so that they can manage it together. But he probably wasn't going to listen, like many young people his age. They think they're wise. They tend to think they know everything. And I'm not saying that there aren't very bright and capable 20-somethings out there. But there is something to be said for those of us who are older who have gone through life's experiences. And there's just no telling a young person who is an adult that they're going to be making a big mistake. Leilani, I guess, just had to let him go. She may have felt like she'd run the risk of getting into a fight with Bear. She knew her son best, and she probably knew how he was going to react. And as much as we want to rein our kids in when you see them making choices that may not be for the best, sometimes we just have to let it go and let them learn the hard way. Let them make their mistakes, let them learn, and we could tell them we told them so later on. Unfortunately, Leilani did allow for him to live his life and learn his lessons because that's what she figured was going to happen. But she would never be able to have that "I told you so" conversation with her son. So come Saturday, August 29th, 2015. On that day, many of Bear's relatives had attended a funeral of a family member, but Bear didn't go. He wasn't feeling well. He was fatigued and lethargic. He had no energy, and his feet were giving him a lot of problems. Leilani went to the funeral, but Bear was weighing heavily on her mind that day. I'm sure she thought about him all the time, especially since he moved, wondering how he was doing or how he was feeling. So she decided to call him after the funeral to check in on him and to see if he wanted to hang out for a little bit. She knew he was going through a rough patch, and the fact that a family member had recently passed away certainly didn't make things any better. It was not uncommon for Bear's mental state to be linked to how well or how bad he and his body were feeling on any given day. Leilani, from her interviews, you can see that she tried really hard to be what Bear needed in terms of a parent and seemed cautious about overstepping. As much as she wanted to, and she would most likely go on to wish that she had been more firm with him. Again, sometimes when you have adult children, you just can't. You can't intervene. You can't force them into doing anything or listening to you anymore. The way that you used to anyway. So Leilani came to pick him up, but it was apparent that Bear wasn't in a great mood. His temper was short. He didn't have much patience for anything. and before long he just asked his mom to take him back to his house, which she did. When they got back there, it was getting late, but she didn't leave right away. She tried to encourage him in regards to looking towards the future. Perhaps he could consider taking some college courses, maybe finding a direction to go in life. Even though he would be financially stable and it would not be necessary for him to work, that didn't mean that he couldn't head over to the local community college and explore some things that might be of interest to him. Knowing that he was having such a terrible day, I don't know how receptive he was going to be to his mom's suggestions at that point. It sounded like she was worried he was going to deteriorate more so mentally, emotionally, and physically if he didn't seek out something new and different that piqued his interests. And as she talked about it, Bear was becoming more angry and more frustrated, and soon the conversation with his mom turned into an argument. He basically blew up at her and told her she has no understanding of what his life is like. She could see that there really wasn't going to be anything that she could say or do to calm him down at that point, so she figured it would be best if she just left. And maybe once they both had a chance to cool down or sleep it off, they could talk again in the morning. So about 30 minutes after they got back to his house, Leilani went home. She told him that she would see him the next day around lunchtime. She would bring him food every day, and they could talk more then. When Leilani got home, she sent a text message to Bear telling him that she was home. He said, "Okay, I love you." And Leilani would never see or hear from Bear again. The following day, Leilani reached out to Bear by way of text, but she did not receive an answer. She figured it was because of the argument that they had had the night before, so at this point, she didn't worry too much about it, figuring that he was still upset. A little while later, she texted again. She didn't want to go over there if he was still angry, and her showing up would just make it worse, she figured, but Leilani still received no answers from him. So she went ahead with her plan to prepare him some food and got ready to head over there that afternoon to drop off a meal. Because mad or not mad, she knew how bad Bear's condition had gotten. She was fairly certain he wasn't going to be able to make himself anything good to eat. She knew he wasn't going to be able to go anywhere. She had been worried about him for a while by then. The neuropathy, the weight loss, and his mental state on top of everything else. Leilani still waited for a little while to hear from Bear past lunchtime into the mid-afternoon. When he still failed to return her text messages, she had had enough and decided that she was going to go over there with the food. If he's mad, so be it. He's still got to eat. As she pulled up to the house, as she expected, his car was parked out front. The condition his feet had been in lately had rendered him unable to drive. When Leilani tried to gain entry through the front door, it was locked. She had a key to his house, but she didn't want to barge in, thinking he was ignoring her text because he was mad, so she knocked on the door some more. She went around the side of the house. She called his name a few times, but still all was quiet. She thought maybe he might have been asleep and wasn't hearing her, but, it was the middle of the afternoon, and she knew that he hadn't gone anywhere since the night before, at least she thought. It didn't look like he had any of his friends over, and the house was very still and quiet. After debating what to do next, Leilani decided she had had enough tiptoeing around Bear's feelings and let herself in. If he was already mad, then it wasn't going to make any difference anyway. As Leilani made her way inside, she quickly realized that he wasn't there. Well, if he wasn't going to be home, the least he could have done was message her and tell her not to come, that he wouldn't be there, but he didn't even do that. But this didn't annoy Leilani. It actually caused her to become even more worried immediately. Even if one of his friends had come to pick him up, she thought it was highly unlikely that he would have gone because he had been in such a bad way physically. But because they had fought and he had been so emotional and angry the night before, she considered the possibility that Bear had done something drastic or possibly even caused himself harm. her mind went there because in an interview, Leilani talked about how Bear had an older stepbrother, the son of her husband, and he had committed suicide about a year earlier, and it deeply affected Bear. Is it possible he would have done the same thing? Leilani thought it was a very real possibility. With the thought that Bear may have done harm to himself, Leilani quickly searched every inch of the house, any place that he could have possibly been, but he wasn't there. While she was relieved to not have found him dead anywhere inside the house, it still didn't answer the question as to where he was. She just knew, based on how he was feeling the night before, the chances of him being able to go out anywhere were slim. As she continued to stand there in her son's quiet, empty home, she glanced around and started looking at his things. And that is when a few things stood out to her that didn't seem right, and that gave her a very eerie feeling. Leilani was at Bear's house pretty much every day for hours. She was there helping him, making him food, taking him to run errands. She knew what should and shouldn't be when it comes to the condition of Bear's house. First off, one big thing that Leilani noticed immediately was the large television that Bear had in his room was missing. It's described in articles as being a big screen TV, and a big screen is considered to be 55 to 75 inches. I don't know how TVs are measured in other countries. In inches, we measure diagonally from corner to corner. So if you take the height of a person who is about 5 foot 6 inches tall or 1.67 meters and measured their arm span, that's about the average size of a big screen TV, about the distance of that person's arms across the screen diagonally from fingertip to fingertip. So it's typically a big TV. And I know today TVs don't weigh all that much. I think I have a 55-inch TV in my living room, and I can lift it pretty easily. TVs are thin and lightweight these days. Unlike when we were kids, right? It took 2 or 3 people to move a TV. And remember those really ugly floor console TVs that used to sit on the floor, like a TV built into the ugliest piece of furniture that anybody could find? We never had one when I was a kid, but some of my neighbors did. And even one of my friends that I hung out with into my mid-20s, her mom still had one in her living room at the time. Those TVs look so heavy. But even the TV I had in my room as a kid, it was a hand-me-down from the living room. And this was a big old Sony. And man, it was so heavy. But anyway, TVs may have been a little bit heavier in 2015 than they are today. Not by much. And these TVs are crazy thin these days, and they don't weigh a lot, but they can be awkward and cumbersome to carry despite not weighing as much as your great-grandma's floor console. But the big question here is, where would Bear's TV had gone, even if he was able to lift it on his own? Leilani looked around the house to see if he had moved it someplace else, but it was nowhere to be found. The TV was just gone. So where was it, and how did Bear manage to get it out of the house? She didn't think he would have been able to carry the TV and walk without the aid of his crutches. She figured, okay, maybe one of his friends came over and helped him move it, but why would they do that? Did they take it over to someone else's house for some reason? Did he sell it? Did they need it to play video games? It didn't make sense, because if you're going to go to your buddy's house to play video games, you bring your video game console with you. It's much easier to bring your PlayStation or your Xboxes over to each other's houses. They usually don't bring each other's TVs along with them. That seems a little bit extra, even if your buddy doesn't have as good as a TV as you do. Maybe Bear gave it away with the intentions of buying something bigger and better. Okay, but that still doesn't account for where Bear is at. His TV being missing isn't a big deal, but where is he? Maybe was it possible that after Leilani left the night before, that Bear tried to wind down and calm down by playing video games? Maybe he got mad at his game and threw his controller, busting up his TV screen? You'd think somebody would have a little bit more restraint than that, but video game players can have some pretty massive controller throwing tantrums. Maybe he was so mad at himself that he had the TV taken away out of his sight so he didn't have to stare at his broken TV. It's highly unlikely. That's just something that I thought of that maybe happened to the TV. None of it really made any sense, whichever way you look at it. The TV being gone, why? There's no reason for it. Leilani began to notice a few more things going on around the bedroom that raised some red flags. Bear's bed linens were missing. The sheets, both top and fitted, along with his comforter, were missing. Leilani knew that his linens were on his bed because she helped him with those sort of tasks around the house, but everything was gone with the exception of the pillows, I believe. I think I heard a report that the comforter was still there, but either way, at the very least, the sheets were missing. She checked around the house and the laundry hamper and in the washer and in the dryer. However, unlikely it was that Bear would have been changing his bedding in the middle of the night and washing the old set. She still checked anyway, but those items that belonged on his bed were gone, according to the charlieproject.org page. It's reported there that it's the sheets and comforters missing, but on Danelle Hallen's YouTube video on this case, she said the comforter was thrown off to the side of the bed along with all of Bear's pillows. And if you haven't heard of or watched Danelle's YouTube channel, her name is spelled DANELLEHALLEN, and she does her YouTube channel and talks about true crime cases. She's even given our show a mention, I believe, in her episode on Bryce Les Pisa. I'll post a link to her video on Bear in the show notes. I really enjoy her YouTube channel. She's really cute and fun to watch. She has a lot of passion for true crime, so if you haven't watched her, give it a try. Anyway, the thing that really got Leilani thrown into a panic was when she saw the things that Bear usually kept in his safe were gone too. I believe she said there was about $7,000 in there that she knew of. It was left open and it was empty. Bear also had a black and red backpack in which he kept about a week's worth of medications that he needed to manage his diabetes, including insulin. Also missing were his crutches, and oddly, one glove was missing and one sandal was also missing. So it kind of looked as though maybe Bear decided to take off for a few days to give himself some time to get away, to cool down, to blow off steam, seeing that his medications and his crutches were also gone. The single sandal was alarming on the surface, and also Leilani knew that if Bear had gone anywhere, she would have needed a friend to have given him a ride and helped him to get around. But what she noticed Bear didn't take was his toothbrush, his glasses, and his phone charger. The ensuing investigation would later reveal that Bear's phone had either died or was powered off on August 30th, 2015, so within a day of his disappearance. And as far as his glasses, Bear had cataracts, so he really needed them to see at all times. He only really liked to take them off to sleep. And of course, his car was there, so somebody must have picked him up. Leilani figured she would start by talking to some of his friends and one of Bear's roommates to see if they had any information. The strange thing was the single glove and the single sandal. I don't know what kind of glove it was, or if it was one of those things that maybe Bear wore, those gloves with the fingers cut off to support the palms of his hands while he's using his crutches or his wheelchair. I looked around for more pictures of him to see if there were any of him using his wheelchair or his crutches with his gloves on, but I didn't see any. However, I did see a picture of Bear sitting in his wheelchair, and he had a sandal on his right foot, and his left foot had some bandages wrapped around it, but he did not have the left sandal on. So this may explain why one sandal was around and the other one wasn't. I don't know if he had his foot wrapped the last night that his mom saw him, but I was confused about the sandal. It kind of gave me an ominous feeling, but once I noticed the picture, it seemed as though he did not have footwear on if he was experiencing pain or discomfort in one of his feet due to the neuropathy, so there would be occasions where Bear would only have one sandal on. At this point, seeing all this stuff, Leilani was satisfied, at the very least, that Bear didn't hurt himself there in the house, and based on the things that were gone, his crutches, medicine, money, and his phone, like I said, she kind of thought that maybe he was just taking a break. From there, Leilani spoke to one of the 2 roommates that lived in the house. He was home at the time, and she asked him if he knew where Bear was. Did he mention he was going anywhere? And the roommate really had no idea anything was going on. And I think a lot of us feel we're pretty vigilant in our homes and would notice certain things, but this kind of reminds me of when Travis Alexander was murdered in his upstairs master bedroom bathroom. And for several days, his roommates just kind of came and went without any concern about why Travis's car was there, but they hadn't seen him. His door's been closed and locked for days, yet nobody noticed. I mean, it's going to become apparent later on that something must have happened to Bear and the things were being taken from his home, particularly the TV, and yet the roommates were completely oblivious. Then again, these are busy young people, just like the ones living in Travis Alexander's house. They're busy, they live in a busy house, so the sound of a big screen TV being removed from the home, the bedding, the contents of the safe, if there was any sound at all, it's probably going to go unnoticed. Not if I live there, I'm nosy as all get out. Well, maybe it isn't necessarily being nosy, just awareness. Who am I kidding? I'm nosy, and it is yet another character flaw that I am currently not working on. But alas, the roommate had very little information to share with Leilani about where Bear might be. He said that he saw Bear when he, meaning the roommate, arrived home around 2 a.m. So just about 4 hours after Leilani had dropped him off at home the previous night around 10. So we know Bear was at his house in the early morning hours, at least according to the roommate. Though I've come to believe that the roommate assumed that Bear was there because his bedroom door was closed, so I'm not quite sure if he actually physically laid eyes on Bear. The roommate said when he got there, nothing looked out of place. It didn't look as if anyone had gained entry into the home by force, and the roommate did say that Bear's bedroom door had been shut all the next day, and he assumed that Bear was feeling sick and was staying in bed resting, because this was the next afternoon. He didn't want to bother Bear. He didn't ever attempt to check on him. Which, I believe that to an extent, but I would think if I had a roommate with some serious health problems and noticed that their bedroom door was closed for as many as 14 or 15 hours, I'm pretty sure I would have an urge to at least try to quietly tap on the door or to crack it open a little bit to peek to see if I could see my roommate sleeping and breathing. But again, that's just nosy and suspicious me talking, not a 20-year-old guy trying not to worry about anything. So when the roommate found out Bear was never there, he was surprised. He thought that he was home the whole time, and he never saw Bear that day. He never saw him go anywhere or with anyone, and Bear didn't say anything to him or call him or send him a text that he wasn't going to be home. So as it stood, Bear was gone, and nobody knew anything, and nobody had heard from him. Leilani decided to just try and remain calm for the time being, assuming that this may be related to the fight that they had the day before. She knew that he was having a hard time being sick and being in a lot of pain, so she tried to push the worst case scenarios out of her head for now. The next day, Leilani was scheduled to take Bear to several doctor's appointments. He was aware that he had these appointments, and he knew it was important for him to go and take care of his health so things would begin to improve. He knew he would feel better if he kept up with his appointments. So Leilani decided to wait until the next following day, which would have been Monday, August 31st, 2015. And she was certain that he would not miss those appointments as he knew that they were essential to manage his health and pain. I don't know exactly how many doctor's appointments he had that day, but it was apparently numerous. So what she did was she arrived at each doctor's office where each appointment was scheduled, and she sat and waited to see if he would either come on his own or come with a friend, but he failed to show up for all of them. So Leilani wasn't going to wait anymore. She went to file a missing persons report for her son. But when she did so, she was met with the same reception the parents of adult children who want to report them missing are met with. The same old story. He's 20 years old. He's an adult. He can do what he wants, and that includes going off the grid if he so chooses. But they went ahead and took the report, but for now there really wasn't much that they can do, technically because there was no indication that a crime had been committed. So in order to put her own mind at ease, Leilani just decided to wait a while to see if he would resurface. He did have his medications with him, so she figured he at least remembered he needed that in order to stay well. Maybe once he started to run low, he would have to come home. There was also a huge event that was held every year at the reservation, the annual Barona Band of Indians powwow. It was held the weekend before Labor Day every year. That was the 45th annual powwow that year in 2015 and was one of Bear's favorite things to go to. That year, Labor Day was September 7th. So the powwow was scheduled for Friday, September 24th through Sunday, September 6th. That was the thing that Leilani was sure her son would show up for. He always went. She was certain he would be there, so she would just have to wait until then. And it was a little less than a week away. By the way, this year would have been the 50th annual Barona powwow, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has unfortunately been canceled this year. Leilani's next course of action was to try and get in touch with some of Bear's friends. She was fairly certain that if he had gone anywhere, it was one of his friends that would have helped him and taken him. I'm not sure if she checked his phone records or knew how to gain access to some of his contacts on social media, but she quickly came to realize that since he purchased that home in El Cajon and moved into that area and started hanging out that hookah lounge, his list of friends and contacts had grown exponentially. He had become acquainted with people she had never been aware of before. She had no idea who they were. And it would not be a stretch to assume that Bear also didn't know the company that he was keeping very well either. Bear seemed to be really open to inviting people into his life and into his house without much hesitation. But anyway, Bear was essentially restricted from going anywhere without help. She had just seen him the night before he disappeared, so she was certain that he needed help to get up and go anywhere. And what Leilani wanted was to hear from the person who picked him up. It had to be one of them. She contacted as many of his friends as she could, and still, nobody had any answers for her. Now, I wondered about Bear's cell phone, if Leilani had access to his account, if she was able to pull up his call logs to see who were the last people he had spoken to. If law enforcement had taken Bear's disappearance seriously in the beginning, one of the first things they could have done was get the phone records and talk to the last people that he was in contact with. But they didn't launch their investigation into his disappearance immediately, and that time in the beginning, in the early stages of a disappearance, would be lost forever, and we know that those hours are so precious. But as it were, there did not seem to be anything that led anywhere that came about through a look at Bear's call log. So it was either one of three things. If the person or persons responsible for Bear having gone missing was listed in the call log, then for whatever reason they'd been cleared, or the investigation turned up nothing incriminating. Or the phone that this unknown person was using was not traceable, or it was a burner type phone. Or the person who caused Bear to disappear never had any contact with him at all through the cell phone. They just snuck up on him late at night and took him by surprise. Bear seemed to have a lot of good friends with whom he was, by all accounts, extremely generous with. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to want to do something to harm Bear when he's opened his home to everybody and takes care of his friends as well. Generous indeed, perhaps to a fault. Some of Bear's friends did say that they had known Bear to be gone for a week, maybe longer on occasion for whatever reasons, so him being gone wasn't as alarming to them right off the bat. But the thing is, when Bear did take off for a short period of time or a few days, His mom was either with him or she knew where he was and what he was doing. This time, he had ghosted his friends and his mom. So the weekend of the powwow arrived. Leilani was still hopeful that she would find Bear at this event on the Barona reservation. She talked to the attendees. She had missing persons flyers printed, which she passed out at this event. But again, there was no information, no leads, no Bear. So by the end of powwow weekend, it was exactly 1 week since anyone had seen or heard from Bear. The first of the month had passed. He had missed all of his doctor's appointments. He missed the powwow. And then Leilani found out that Bear never came to the reservation to pick up his monthly stipend check. The only thing Leilani could do next was to try law enforcement one more time. She had done all the investigation she could think of on her own. She had waited, she looked for him, she talked to his friends, but it had been a week without so much as a word from him. All she could do was hope that law enforcement would take it more seriously now that a week had passed. By this time, she decided to impress upon them that he had a potentially life-threatening health issue that could become very complicated very quickly if he did not have access to his medications, that this was becoming more urgent with each passing day, and it was likely he was in need of medical attention immediately. She told him that he had type 1 diabetes, he was suffering from neuropathy, he's disabled, he relies on crutches or a wheelchair, or he needs assistance from other people to get around. He can't see, he doesn't have his glasses with him, he needs access to his medications, he was at serious risk of harm or death because of his condition and his health, he could barely walk on his own, and fortunately, law enforcement moved forward with opening an active investigation into Bear's disappearance once Leilani impressed all of these things on them. The most alarming thing for law enforcement, aside from the running low on medications and missing appointments and missing the powwow, was him not picking up his stipend money. That was very concerning, because even if Bear went missing voluntarily like they had told her in the beginning, he's still going to need money to live. That was the red flag that got law enforcement moving. The investigation included sending out a team to search Bear's home and to take a look around for evidence that a crime had taken place. Luminol tests revealed that there did not appear to be any violent event that happened in the home where there had been any blood evidence that had been either left there or cleaned up. There was no sign that there had been any forced entry or any fight that took place there, but it had been more than a week. People have probably been in and out of the house. The scene had been compromised, and not to mention the 2 roommates that he had shared the house with. In addition to all the guests that Bear would have entertained, there was people all over the place. A forensic investigation into the scene would turn up many, many pieces of evidence and fingerprints and whatnot, but all of it probably had a reason for being there if any of the forensic evidence were to be linked to anyone in Bear's massive social circle. There was also the issue of the TV, like I had talked about earlier. It was big and awkward, and they determined that there was probably no way that Bear would have been able to move it on his own. So they wanted to figure out who moved it and where is it now. If law enforcement could find the answer to that, then they might find answers to where Bear was as well. Also concerning to law enforcement, like it had been to Leilani at the onset of this, was the missing bed linens and the missing money. The fact that Bear had left his glasses, which he needed to see, he wouldn't have walked out of the house without wearing them. Law enforcement were not getting anything, nothing more than what Leilani had found during her own initial search for Bear. The next thing law enforcement wanted to do was look at Bear's cell phone locations. The last people to see him that anyone knew of was his mom around 10 p.m. when she left him at the house, and then his roommate around 2 in the morning when his roommate arrived home. It was discovered in an examination of Bear's cell phone activity that it had completed a data dump at 1:30 in the morning, and the location of this dump was at a tower near the Barona Resort and Casino. The casino is open all night, so it would not have been completely unusual for Bear to go there. He was only 20, so he couldn't gamble, but he could still hang out in certain areas. I don't know how many of the eateries are open all night, but it was someplace he could stop in and he could sit in the food court or use the restroom and do things like that. Then his phone completed another data dump almost a half hour later around 2 a.m, but this one happened in an unincorporated community in eastern San Diego called Santa Isabel. So in looking at maps, Bear's home was located on Joey Avenue in El Cajon. And just in looking at the area surrounding the neighborhood that his house was in, I can see why he wanted to be away from the rural area that the reservation was located in to be here instead. There is all kinds of stuff nearby. Lots of taco places and Mexican restaurants, which is common all over Southern California, but I remember thinking that they were definitely more plentiful the closer you get to the international border that California shares with Mexico, and El Cajon is less than 30 minutes away from the border. There's a Domino's and a Starbucks and Chinese takeout, a Panda Express, Jack in the Box, Del Taco, Carl's Jr., KFC, Boston Market, Panera Bread, Denny's if you're feeling a little fancier, Black Angus if you're feeling a lot fancier. I see a buffet. Man, I miss buffets. I think I ate at a buffet at the Samstown Casino just about a day before the Nevada governor shut down all of them. So anyway, rest in peace buffets. I don't know when they're coming back. So there's shopping. I see some of my favorite stores around. It just looks really busy in this area. Dining, churches, hotels, shopping, and all of it is right off Interstate 8. So according to maps, the Barona Resort is 13 to 15 miles or 20 to 24 kilometers, depending on which direction you take. So it's about a 20 to 23 minute drive from Bear's home on Joey Avenue. The direction that he would be traveling would be northeast to get there. The next data dump was in Santa Isabel, and according to Leilani, there doesn't seem to be any reason why he would be in that area specifically. It's another 40 miles or 64 kilometers northeast of Barona, and this happened at 2 a.m. It is quite desolate out there. I can see a few businesses dotted along the main road that goes through Santa Isabel. There's some shops, maybe some mom and pop type places, a bakery, a deli, a pie company, and some collectibles shops, a general store, an art gallery. Up the highway a little further is an antique shop, a vintage marketplace, Mom's Pie House, another antique and collectible store. There's an apple and cidery place. There's the Calico cidery, and then there's the hard cidery. Then there's the obligatory church, the towing company, the mechanic, some schools, a fire station, and a cemetery. Then beyond that, there's campgrounds and ranches and lodges, religious retreats scattered all over the place, and it looks very rural and very rugged. According to Bear's mom, it wouldn't be out of the question for Bear to go to the Barona Resort and Casino, but for him to be in Santa Isabel is another story. As far as she knew, he didn't know anyone or had any ties to the area. Based on his condition and health concerns, he usually stayed pretty close to home. His phone completing a data dump at the Santa Isabel Tower is definitely concerning for Leilani and for law enforcement. He had no reason to be out there in this general area that late at night, early into the morning. It's a cause for worry because we all know what happens in desolate, sparsely populated, out-of-the-way areas like that. And if you're thinking what I'm thinking, then you're saying to yourself that these places make for good body dumps. And on top of that, we have to take into consideration the animals and birds of prey that are in the area. And my apologies if I've slipped into calling him Elijah instead of Bear. I just have been kind of mixing up the two in my own head as I'm going along here. So anyway, even if Bear was alive, his condition would leave him very, very vulnerable out there. Following that 2 a.m. data dump, there was no further activity on his phone. It was either shut off or it died. His bank account has not been accessed, nor have any of his online accounts, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Nothing at all since that night. Once authorities identified the Santa Isabel area as having been one of the last places Bear's phone pinged, they conducted an aerial search but were unable to spot anything that looked as though there had been recent activity, like tire tracks off the road, disturbed land, or anything of the sort. They were certain they'd see something because of all the cell phone information, but they came up with nothing, unfortunately. And since then, there has been nothing that the police investigation has turned up. If it has, they have been keeping it close to the vest. Bear's mom has continued to try to keep Bear's disappearance alive. He's been featured on Disappeared, and the local media touches on his case when the anniversary of his disappearance comes around each August, which is about to happen again in about 12 days from now, at least 12 days from when I'm recording this, on August 29th of 2020. It'll be 5 years. So what happened to Elijah Bear Diaz? Well, there are a couple of scenarios I found floating around on Reddit and whatnot. The first one is Bear took off on his own volition, that he was mad, that he wanted to get away for a period of time, that he had an argument with his mom, that he was a bit frustrated with his health situation. It was like a lot coming down on him at once. If he did leave on his own, he would definitely have needed help. Aside from his car being parked at his house, he himself was barely mobile because of the pain in his feet. He wasn't driving. He needed crutches. He just would have needed assistance. But if he did leave on his own because he was mad, he certainly hasn't come back, and it's going on 5 years. There has been no trace of him. He would have needed to have sought medical attention. He would have needed money. He would have had to have come back eventually if he just left to blow off steam, but he never has. There has been the thought that maybe Bear's mom knows something, or perhaps she did something to him, and the reason this is being said is because of the fight they have, and I find this to be absolutely absurd. In addition to the fight, this idea has floated around because she was one of the last known persons to have seen him. But no, I do not believe for a minute that she had anything to do with it. Everything we expect parents of missing children to do when they go missing, she checked all the boxes. Her actions were appropriate, her emotions were on point, and she genuinely appeared heartbroken in her interviews, and she has searched relentlessly for him. If she had pulled a Casey Anthony, then okay, we could list her as a person of interest. But no, I won't believe that for a minute, and nobody can convince me otherwise. Of all the theories, the things that seem to be the most likely is that Bear met with foul play. It was either a crime committed by a stranger or a crime committed by a friend or acquaintance. And because the people around Bear probably noticed he had expensive belongings, all the things that a 20-year-old would love to have, cars, TVs, video game consoles, even his own house. People are just going to know that this guy has money, and not a lot of 20-year-olds bring in that kind of income that he had without having a job. And maybe there was a certain amount of jealousy going around with his friends. I don't know. It's possible. And it's also possible that Bear could have been fairly open about his financial situation, especially if people knew that he was Native American and they knew that he was part of the Barona tribe and that tribe members are entitled to a portion of the profits from the casino that they bring in each month. On top of that, Bear was disabled. He was thin. He appeared to be frail. And at the time he disappeared, he was experiencing a lot of pain in his feet and was just about unable to move without help, crutches, or a wheelchair. Could someone in his circle of friends have done something to harm him in order to rob him? If they were known to Bear, in order to get away with that, they'd have to silence him. Otherwise, he'd be able to report the crime and identify who it was to law enforcement. A stranger would not necessarily need to harm Bear, and a stranger would not have really known what Bear had, or if he had a lot of money or a lot of expensive things. If it was a stranger targeting him for some reason, they'd really be just taking a shot in the dark here and happen to luck out. Would one of Bear's friends really betray him in this manner? Would somebody who gained Bear's trust really turn around and harm him so they could get away with robbing him? Of course, it's very possible. I mean, people have killed for less. Like, what are we doing here on a podcast talking about crime for hours and hours on end? people do some crazy things. Young people who are known to have money have been targeted in some of the cases that we've talked about in the past. It usually happens in a situation where the victim or potential victim might be a drug dealer or something like that, where they are targeted because, for one, they have a lot of money at their home, and two, because they're drug dealers and they're not likely to report the crime to law enforcement, as it runs the risk of drawing attention to their illegal activities and potentially getting themselves in trouble. I guess they're generally thought of being easy targets. I personally wouldn't think that because they're drug dealers. They might be armed. They might be dangerous people. I wouldn't think robbing a drug dealer is exactly the smartest thing to do, but neither is robbing a drug dealer. But Bear was an easy target because of his physical limitations. And the fact that one of his big TVs was missing along with all of his bed linens and all the contents of his safe, it tends to bolster the idea that Bear met with foul play. 2 months after Bear went missing, Leilani went through the process of being named the conservator of his estate. And the intentions were to set up a search headquarters at his house. I do believe Leilani had some difficulty getting Bear's 2 roommates to vacate the home, which led to some suspicion about them and some speculation that they may know more than they are letting on. However, if they were in the know about this or his disappearance, I don't think that they'd necessarily want to stick around. I just think that they really wanted to stay there to continue to sponge off of Bear's house. But again, nobody has been definitively linked as having anything to do with Bear having gone missing. Then in May of 2006, Bear's dad, who lived about an hour and a half away from him, he had become involved in the search when tips came in that Bear had been spotted in his area. Well, he sadly died unexpectedly of a massive heart attack, which I wouldn't be surprised was accelerated by the stress of his son having gone missing. Questions in this case continue to linger. And one of the big ones for me is if Bear's cell phone records, his phone logs, if they were investigated to see who the last people he talked to were. Who were the last ones to be in touch with him aside from his mom, because it may have brought about some good information as to who may have come over last, who may have given him a ride, things like that. However, it is my understanding that Bear's place had kind of an open door policy. It wasn't too far from the hookah lounge, so it is not out of the question that people would drop in unexpectedly. I think it's likely because Bear was home more often in recent days and weeks because of his health. People may have dropped in to check on him or to hang out or to keep him company. So that leaves open the possibility of someone who would have some more nefarious intentions of doing the same thing, dropping in unannounced. If this is the case, then there is a chance that there is no phone or text communication that occurred between Bear and this person because their visit would have been unplanned. And maybe, just maybe, robbing Bear and possibly kidnapping him or causing him harm had been a plan that was tentative until the opportunity to pull it off presented itself. It is possible that someone wanted to rob Bear's house but not necessarily hurt him, specifically to take the TV and the contents of the safe, and if so, how would they have known the safe and the combination? Well, it sounds like to me either Bear was too trusting or had too much of a false sense of security, or both. Bear could have regularly left the safe unlocked, or someone could have been watching him without his knowledge as he accessed the safe and memorized the combination. It seems unlikely there'd be a break-in because Bear did live with 2 roommates, and to try to find a time when all 3 people were not at home at the same time would be problematic. As I mentioned a moment ago, the roommates, at least one of them, raised some suspicions because he said he arrived home early that morning and saw Bear, and he said it was at 2 in the morning. But Bear's cell phone did a data dump near the Barona Casino around 1:30 and then again at 2 a.m. in Santa Isabel. So if Bear was with his phone, which it would make sense that he was, then the roommate is either misremembering or he's lying, which is why there is suspicion. It's hard to believe that any kind of foul play would befall Bear there in the home with the roommate being there and having heard nothing, unless he was in on it, or he may be afraid or in fear of his life if he were to speak up. There is very little in the way of evidence that a crime took place. Luminol tests reveal no signs of blood or a cleanup, so if the roommate did name suspects and nothing came of it, he might find himself in trouble with whomever he named. But again, like I said earlier, roommates, especially these young types, probably aren't all that observant, or nosy, or both. The bed sheets, I think, could have been used to cover up the TV while it was being carried out by whoever took it. The sheets could have been used to wrap up Bear's body. I did not see any information about a struggle, and like I said, there were no obvious signs of foul play, such as blood or anything like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean Bear wasn't harmed. He was quite frail, and I don't think it would take very much effort to gain control over him, incapacitate him, or harm him. He could have been restrained, forced to open his safe, taken to another location, and either left there in some desolate place, as there are plenty of desolate places in and around San Diego County, or he could have been murdered. Elijah Running Bear Diaz has not been seen or heard from since the day he disappeared, August 29, 2015. We are approaching the 5th anniversary of his disappearance this month, and his family is still no closer to knowing what became of him. Leilani has accepted that Bear is no longer alive and has had him declared dead. Having long hair in the Native American culture is symbolic of connecting them to Mother Earth with the belief that their hair is the physical, tangible manifestation of a growing spirit, and possibly allows for a connection to all things beyond normal human perception. Leilani had kept her hair long, but when she declared Bear dead, she did what many tribal members do, in that she cut her hair in accordance with tradition when there is a death of an immediate family member as a symbol of grief and a physical reminder of her loss. The hair she grew was a representation of the time that she spent with Bear on Earth. Since her time with him is over and he is gone, her hair is cut, and the new growth is a symbol of Bear's afterlife. Leilani has said of Bear's loss, "All I can do is find peace, embrace love, and hold on to joy. Bear would want me to. He loved me so strongly. I simply need to hold tight to my memories, keep moving forward, count my blessings, and reach for the full moon." Bear went missing from El Cajon, California. He was 20 years old at the time of his disappearance. He is Native American and a member of the Barona Native American Tribe. He had dark brown hair and brown eyes. He is 5 foot 9 inches tall, or 1.75 meters, and weighs about 110 pounds or 50 kilograms. He was last seen wearing a gray tank top and white basketball shorts. He has type 1 diabetes and needs insulin, and when he went missing, one of his feet was seriously injured and he required crutches or a wheelchair. Bear usually wears glasses, but those were found to be at home, and he has a great deal of difficulty seeing without them. He has a tattoo of a bear claw on the inside of his left forearm. He was last seen on the 700 block of Joey Avenue, where his house is located. He was in poor health, underweight, very weak, and would not be able to get around without assistance due to his limited mobility, and his mother Leilani believes that somebody forced him from the home and murdered him. There have been no viable leads, nor have any persons of interest been publicly named in the 5 years since he vanished. If anyone has any information regarding the disappearance of Elijah Running Bear Diaz, The El Cajon Police Department phone number is area code 619-579-3311. And that will bring this 156th episode of California Dreaming to a close. Please come over to the Facebook discussion group if you have not done so yet and request to join. It is there we discuss the cases that we cover. We share our thoughts and opinions, not only about our show, but also any other podcasts that you listen to, documentaries that you've watched, books you've read, any current news stories, posts about your pets, and posts about funny memes. I also have to give you a reminder that we usually do not allow for political posts or religious posts, so keep that in mind when you're choosing to post an article or a meme. Otherwise, you're free to share whatever. You can also go over to the show's Facebook page, like that page, and leave a review or a recommendation. You can also follow us on Twitter at CaliforniaPod and on Instagram at CaliforniaDreamingPod. California Dreaming is brought to you by the Orbital Jigsaw Network, a podcast production company on a mission to create some of the best podcasts to listen to, with an eclectic roster of shows and content that includes true crime, history, sports entertainment, gaming, social media. Visit our website at www.orbitaljigsaw.com. I want to mention that Nick, the guy who runs Orbital Jigsaw, he has a professional wrestling podcast called BWO, which stands for Busted Wide Open. He covers not only the WWE, but also the AEW. So if you are interested in wrestling and the new AEW league, then check out his show. He's got some really exciting things going on that he just posted about on his Facebook page. So go listen to his show if you like wrestling. You will find links to all of our podcasts as well as a direct link to our merchandise store on TeePublic. Again, it's www.orbitaljigsaw.com. And don't forget to click on the link in the show notes. It will direct you to the free Patreon episode that I've opened up to the public for the next 3 days on Daniel Wozniak. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Roseanne. Until next time, sweet dreams.